You're listening to episode 105 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Maia Duerr speaks with us about her book, Work That Matters. Create a livelihood that reflects your core intention. If you're listening to this podcast, you may be one of the people whose livelihood, what you do to earn a living, is closely aligned with your intentions, values, and aspirations. Or you may be, as I have been until relatively recently, making your way in the world doing something enriching, but not necessarily nourishing or fulfilling. We may be very successful in careers that earn us prestige and a comfortable social class, but is that enough? Having made this change myself a few years ago, of course there are difficulties and adjustments to make, and I would do them again in a heartbeat. Throughout her life, Maia Duerr has been passionate about pursuing the question, how can I create right livelihood? She has served as research director at the Center for Contemplative Mind in Society and director of the Upaya Zen Center Buddhist Chaplaincy Training Program, among many other jobs, ranging from alfalfa sprout packer to anthropologist to Buddhist chaplain, to finally realize what she calls liberation-based livelihood. She defines this as livelihood that is an expression of your life's core intention. Maia has an MA in Cultural Anthropology from the California Institute of Integral Studies and currently lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She blogs at the Liberated Life Project. Our guest today is Maia Duerr. Maia, welcome to the podcast. Glad to finally be able to speak with you.
Great to be here, Ted. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. So let's just dive right in. Why don't we have you tell us about your background?
Okay. And as I said to you before we started the podcast, that's such a huge question. So, hopefully I won't go off the deep end. You can help me stay in the pool if I do. Maybe I'll start with background in relationship to this book that I wrote, because that helps me to kind of put it into a framework. So this book that I wrote is called Work That Matters. Create a livelihood that reflects your core intention. And I have a background as a meditation practitioner for a very long time. But before I ever started meditating, I was in the world of work, as most of us were. And for as long as I can remember, I feel like I've always had this sort of burning desire to figure out how to have work that I love. And some of that comes from my background of growing up with a father who was really unhappy in his work. I grew up in Southern California, right outside of Los Angeles. And my dad was he was one of the tour counselors for the American Automobile Club. So he was one of the guys that you would go to if you wanted to drive across country, and he would get your maps out and do the triptych for you and tell you where the, really great places were to stop on your route. And he loved to travel. So one would think that would be a great job for him. But for a number of reasons, it just wasn't. And he would come home every night, and I would just remember, very vividly, we would be at the dinner table and he would come home usually very late and just sit there and just be dejected and complain about his job and his boss. And it was just heartbreaking to watch that, over the years. And then as I was growing up, I would watch my friends and their parents would have similar experiences. And it just seemed like it was kind of a given that almost nobody felt good about their work. People were just trying to get through it, to get to vacations or the weekend. And something inside me was always like, that's not going to be me. So that became like my pilgrimage for, most of my adult life was like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. What's going to be, the work that I'm going to love? And so to do that, I went through a very long and winding path. I'll spare you all the details. I do share some of the story in the book, but, just like having a career that spans like actually several different professions, from being a mental health professional. That was my first one. I got a degree in music therapy, worked in the mental health field in psychiatric settings for about 10 years, got super burned out, went back to graduate school, got a degree in cultural anthropology, did things related to that for a number of years, then found my way in a really interesting way, into engaged Buddhism, and started to work at Buddhist Peace Fellowship in the Bay Area. Yeah, there was that. And I started to have a meditation practice around that time as well. So that kind of converged. And also worked at the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society out in Western Massachusetts, and was their research director for a few years. So really this kind of long span of many different kinds of jobs and professions. And I can't really say that I had good success. I mean, I kept trying things, and then I just got frustrated and I would try something else. And it really wasn't until maybe about 12 years ago or so that I feel like I started to see how I could bring my meditation practice into that process of understanding my work. And then it became a much more conscious and intentional journey to see, okay, what are my gifts? What am I here on the planet for? How does that intersect with what the possibilities are? And how can I actually make a living doing that? So there's much more I could kind of go off on different tangents there, but in a way, that's what brought me here, to this conversation today and to writing a book, was just realizing like, oh, I've actually learned a lot in this process. And I've kind of brought this for me, like a very shadowy question out more into the open, and really feel like I finally got it the past 10 years. This is, the kind of equation that works for me. And this is the process that took me to get here, to get this to this place of feeling good about what I do, and actually feeling like it's aligned with who I am as a person. So that's a long way of telling you my background in the sort of context of livelihood got to where I am today.
Thank you for doing that. And that's a really good segue. One of the things I wanted to ask you was, in this course, this journey through several different careers and being a meditator, and the things that come up as we get more deeply steeped into that introspection and really getting a sense of listening to ourselves, to what's going on with us. Did it hit kind of a critical mass of realization with, these are my values and this is what I'm doing, and I'm in alignment. I need to share this. I need to write this book. What was it that prompted you to get to that point where, okay, now I'm going to, maybe a bit anachronistic to say, but put pen to paper?
Right. Yeah. Well, the book actually took its initial form as an online course. So before I wrote the book, I actually created a course called Fall in Love with Your Work. And I think I did that in maybe 2011, 2012, somewhere in there. And the way that came about was I was taking a course from somebody else, a really wonderful business coach named Pamela Slim, who actually wrote the foreword for this book. And that was like maybe 2 or 3 years into having my own business. So I was kind of exploring, what else can I offer? How else can I make a living here within my business? And Pam's course was on how to teach, how to like design courses that people will really, thrive in. And so I think I was starting to claim myself as a teacher in that process, but I actually didn't know what I should be teaching. I mean, I'm actually now in the process of working with my Zen teacher, Vicki Austin in San Francisco, around Dharma teaching. I'm not there yet, but I'm sort of like a Dharma teacher in process. But earlier, when we back up to like 5 or 6 years ago when this started, I wasn't there with that, but I definitely meditation and mindfulness is an important part of my life. But I was trying to figure out, what is it that I am offering people? And in Pam's course, she gave us a little bit of a carrot on a stick. And she said, if you can, figure out what your course is, what kind of online course you want to create and offer by the end of my course, I'll give you lots of promotion for it. And she had a really big email list. So it's like, oh, great. And then I thought, well, what am I going to teach? And I started to think about my life and look back on all the things I did and what I was really good at. And I started to realize exactly what I'm telling you. Like, oh my gosh, I'd become an expert at really understanding like things that don't work for me in terms of livelihood and what does. And then realizing a lot of other people are going through that as well. I mean, I just know I'm not the only person who struggled with feeling like I was miserable in my work. So many people out there have that experience. So that was what was the impetus to actually create the online course. And I offered it for about 3 or 4 years. And every time I offered it, it had about like 25 people go through it. And it started out, I think, as a 12-week course. And then I kind of brought it down to 6. But every time I did it, I would love to watch the transformations that people had in the course. And then I kind of realized like, oh, I've got something here. And then as I started to think about writing a book, that just became very apparent. Like, why don't I just take the course that I've done and then turn that into a book?
Awesome. And I'm going to want to revisit those stories of transformation a little bit later. But right now, I want to ask about something that stood out for me, notably in the title. And it's an aspect of contemplative practice, I think, that sometimes gets a bit lost under other things that are a little bit more sexy and interesting, is this concept of intention, which is a big part of the book. It's in the title. It's certainly been a part of your life. Tell us a bit about the power of intentionality, what that is, and how that's worked for you.
Well, the first thing I think of when you ask that question, Ted, is, I think in my own practice, my Zen practice, the role that intention plays. And I think I get this from my teachers. So actually, initially, I started practicing with Roshi Joan Halifax. And I'm right here in Santa Fe and work with her for a number of years on the chaplaincy program at Upaya. So, a lot of practice with Roshi Joan and just friendship with her. And then with Vicki at San Francisco Zen Center. And both of them really emphasized intention as like a core piece of practice, which doesn't always happen in Zen practice. I think it's easy for Zen practitioners to get the message about there should be no ambition and to conflate that with them thinking like, well, then, there's no reason for me to sit. I'm just sitting. And in my teaching, I never got that. I always got like, it's so important. The very first thing that you do is just understand why you're practicing. As Roshi Jones so beautifully says, it's like, why are you really here? So almost always when I start my morning meditation practice, that's my first question to myself. It's like, what am I doing? And it can be really simple. I mean, the Bodhisattva vows are wonderful for that. That's just like basically, may I alleviate suffering for myself and other beings. That's my intention for my practice. So it always has been important to me in my practice. And I think what I realized in terms of livelihood was that when I started bringing that same sense of like, what am I doing here? What is it that I have to offer to the question of what's my work? That was when things began to shift. And I went from like, kind of seeking momentary satisfaction in various professions and jobs to really a deeper level of understanding, what my values are and how what I do in the world is aligned with them. So that's what I would say for me has been the power of intentionality. Without that, it's always kind of felt like a little bit like, a ship without an anchor. I know the other metaphor I love to use is that I can remember when I lived in the Bay Area, and there was a period of time when I lived in the East Bay and I had a job in San Francisco. And so it was a fairly long commute. And I would remember sometimes and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, I would get in my car and I would drive to work, whatever it was, 45 minutes an hour. And I would get to the office and I would suddenly realize like I had no recollection of where I had been the 45 minutes before that. It was kind of like being on autopilot. And it really would kind of freak me out when that would happen. It's like, oh my God, like, who was in the driver's seat for those 45 minutes, and just kind of falling asleep to myself for that ride. And I think that can so easily happen. I know it's happened to me, in various jobs I've been at and relationships. And it usually the karma that creates is not so good, I have to say. So I've just found in my life that the more I've brought that kind of level of awareness and intentionality in, I do a better job of not hurting myself or not hurting others. And along with that, of actually doing things that I love to do.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned in this is you explored your values a bit more. And I'm wondering if there were any surprises for you, and how did you do that? What was that like? Did you like, oh, yeah, of course. What was that experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think part of it was, and one of the exercises that I offer in the book is like doing a kind of inventory of my work life. So I think that helps a lot, like to go back and actually look at every single job I've had. And some of them were not paid jobs. I mean, some could have been volunteer stints, and really kind of looking at how I thrived or I didn't thrive in each one of those. And that's where a lot of clues were. So like when I could look back and like, my first career as a mental health professional, I could see some of the stuff that I really loved, which was, I loved working with people who had different cognitive experiences. I really loved like their different perspective. They just saw the world completely differently than quote unquote normal people did, right? So there was that. And just I would look at like what was it about certain jobs that I would kind of light up, that really brought me alive. So there was that. And then I would look at, what did the opposite. Where was I feeling like very constrained, very like I couldn't express who I truly was? And then in the mental health profession, I could see where I was just feeling very frustrated by kind of the structure of some of the systems that I had to work in, the authoritarian quality of it. So that gave me a lot of clues to like, and I'm not even sure values is maybe the best word, but more like, what were my own personality characteristics and what, the kinds of settings that I really could do the best in and the ones that did not bring the best out of me. So doing that kind of inventory was really helpful as a way to kind of see the conditions and the ingredients that were important for me in work.
Did it have a clear distinction between work and your personal life, or did some of this apply to you at home as well?
I would say it definitely applied to me in all parts of my life. Yeah, that's a whole nother topic I could kind of go off on. I mean, actually, I do in the book. That's one of the themes of the book is how to redefine what work is for you. And I think for me, a really formative experiences was when I was about 30. I went to Bali and I was there for a couple of months. And I was just hanging out, basically. So I was in the town of Ubud, which is an artist's enclave in Bali. And this was not long after I graduated with my anthropology degree. So I was really kind of there as an anthropologist, just like watching this different way of life and culture that these folks had. And what I would see was like every day there would be a group of people who would go out and they would do a lot of road work. That was like their job, was maintaining the roads. So that was the job. But they would do it with their families. So they were taking their kids out there. And then they would stop in the middle of the day and they would do like a religious ceremony right there at the work site. And they were also just playing around with each other and their friends were there. So what I really kind of got after watching this for a number of weeks was like there was really no separation between work and family and spirituality and leisure. It was all kind of, woven together. And I've always taken that away with me. And I feel like that is where we get so hung up here in Western culture a lot. Is what's work-life balance? If we began to kind of break down some of those barriers a little bit, we actually wouldn't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said. So you talk about also in the title, creating a livelihood, which is a bit different than falling into one, which I certainly have had the experience of, why am I doing this particular work? It just sort of happened. Mm-hmm. So is this another appearance of intentionality? And how does one create that livelihood?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a more proactive way. It's, a way to put yourself in the process as an agent of change, not just like a victim of something. Yeah, and I think, there's different phrases, and sometimes in the book I'll use it find work that you love. But really what I mean is create work that you love. So I feel like we have a better chance of having a happy work life if we're actually a very engaged partner in that process and not just simply trying to kind of fit ourselves into somebody else's idea of what a job description is.
So in your work, you've seen people living out of alignment with their intentions, with those values or what they love, which is the closest to their inner being. So I'm assuming from the book that people can change their livelihood. Mm-hmm. And if so, what is that transformation? What do you see happen when they do? What's that like?
Yeah, well, I think of, and I have actually a number of stories of people in the book, most of them who took the Fall in Love with Your Work course that I taught before it was a book. So one of them that comes to mind is this wonderful man whose name is Lyndon. And Lyndon lives down in Louisiana, like right in the heart of the Bible Belt. And when he first took my course, he was working in healthcare marketing. So he had a job where he was, in sales and doing that kind of thing. And it was fairly well paying, but he was just kind of running up against his own frustrations with that and just not so happy. So during the time of the course, he really got a chance to explore other things that actually made him happy. And he realized how much he actually really loved supporting people on their spiritual path. So, I think part of what the course did was give him ways to take risks around that in a safe kind of way and a supported way. And just to kind of jump to where he is today, now he's actually a hospice chaplain. So he, in that same way I was talking about, like he did an inventory of his work and realized like there was a part of that he really loved, something around healthcare and people's health and vitality, but it just wasn't working for him to be in marketing, right? So just, in that step-by-step process, supporting him and watching him, just take small risks. The very first thing he did was he decided like he wanted to actually offer a class in yoga and meditation in his community, which again, you have to remember, this is like the Bible Belt in like rural Louisiana. So that was a risk, but he did it in a very measured way. And he thought, well, I'm just going to do this. I'll hang on to my job, but I'll do this on the side. And people actually began to show up. And he just noticed in himself, like how this just, again, that phrase like lit him up, that he loved doing this. And that gave him more confidence to like take more steps in the direction of taking chaplaincy training and actually shifting his whole career. So what I got to see in that process was Lyndon going from somebody who was like marginally happy in his work and a little bit afraid to let it go because of what it paid, to actually beginning to, step out and take some risks and make a really big shift. And then seeing him just really bloom in that process. It was great.
That's wonderful. So let's shift a little bit. I'm wondering if you could tell us about the Liberated Life project.
Yeah, well, that was, it still is the name of a blog that I started somewhere around 2011, I think, 2010. I mean, I've had my own business now for 10 years. And so I've had different phases of that. But that was an early phase of just trying to find a way that I could share my writing with more people. And I called it the Liberated Life Project because to me, that's what's most important. It's like, how do we look at where we're feeling trapped in our lives and not blame it on outside circumstances, but how do we actually find ways to free ourselves from the suffering that's going on?
So I'm wondering what else you would like to share with the listener who might be right at this moment thinking, yeah, that sounds right. My career isn't quite doing it for me. What would you want to share with them?
Yeah, well, in the book, what I share, the framework that I offer is something I call the 6 keys to liberation-based livelihood. So liberation-based livelihood kind of goes with the Liberated Life Project, right? And it's quite simple, actually. I mean, it's a livelihood where you actually do get to express whatever your core intention is in life. And what I found, I mean, this whole process that I went through over the past 10, 12 years, my own experimentation process, what I finally hit on was like, oh, there's these 6 qualities that I realized that I needed to develop in myself in order to actually create work that I loved. And that's what the course was organized around. That's what the book is organized around. And so what I would offer to somebody who's, in that place of feeling like, I got to make a change, what I would say is like, for me, and I don't know if this is going to be true for you, but I would hope so. For me, these really worked. The very first one is about becoming more intimate with your core intention. So that's where we need to start, is getting to know ourselves, that process that I went through. So for each person, I think we need to come to kind of more clarity around why we're here on the planet, basically. And then the second key is around valuing that. So really making sure that we can value our gifts. So that core intention that we have, how does that show up? How do we offer it? And our time. And I think this is probably particularly true for women. It's easy for us to give ourselves away and, not value that. And that will kind of veer us away from our core intention. And one thing that I found so helpful is just to realize, like, just because I'm good at something doesn't mean I should be doing it. Because I think a lot of us get trapped in that. We are good at a number of things that may or may not be lined up with our core intention, but the world sees that. Sometimes they value it quite highly, and we kind of get drawn into that sort of career. And then we can get 5, 10, or 15 years into it and realize like, oh my God, like who am I? Maybe I'm good at this. Maybe I'm given a lot of money for doing this, but it's not what I want to be doing. So there's something in there about valuing your true gifts. That's part of that process. And then the third key is about breaking through inertia and taking action. So, you'll get to a point where you realize like, okay, I can see more clearly now what I want to be doing, but then the fear sets in, or the, analysis paralysis. So in the book, I go through a number of exercises to help move through that. And then the fourth key is an extension of that, which is about really becoming more, raising our level of tolerance for our own discomfort, because this process it requires us to take risks, right? So the more we're able to kind of like play with risks and understand them as something that, we can actually do and they don't have to threaten us, that will move us closer to this liberation-based livelihood. And then there's also asking for help. So that's another one of the keys. Like, we can't do this by ourselves. So how can we strategically, ask for help from friends or, colleagues, and really move ourselves to the next step? So I guess what I would offer to the reader is, for me, these 6 keys have been really fundamental in making these kinds of changes in my work life. And so, but the way I say in the book, it's a very inside out approach. I know when I was in my career frustration mode, I did a lot of things to try to get out of it. I read books like What Color is Your Parachute? I went to a career counselor. I did the aptitude tests, and those were all helpful to a certain degree, but there was something else that wasn't clicking. And so this kind of more internally focused process, I found the places where I had sabotaged myself, basically, and the places where I got afraid. So I think that's how this book is maybe a little bit different than other career books. And I would say, for the reader who's really willing to go there and look at themselves, it's a process that will help you kind of move through your own fears and places of ignorance around livelihood.
Well, for folks who are listening, if you'd like to find out more, you can go to Maia's website, maiaduerr.com, and I'll be linking that on the episode page, as well as having a link to the book we've been talking about. Maia, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ted. This has been great. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.